I urge all of you today, especially those who are students, to act, to enter the list of public service.
It's the power of ideas, and this was one of the reasons that President Kennedy was so interested in young people and their energy and their enthusiasm and their ideas, and I listened to them, and why he had young people in his administration.
You will find the pressures greater than the pay. You may endure more public attacks than support, but you will have the unequaled satisfaction of knowing that your character and talent are contributing to the direction and success of this free society.
President Kennedy challenged a generation to serve their country. He believed, and he brought his country to believe, that politics was a noble profession and that the government had a vital role to play in making the country a better place.
The educated citizen has an obligation to serve the public. He may be a precinct worker or president. He may give his talents at the courthouse, the State House, the White House. He may be a civil servant or a senator, a candidate or a campaign worker, a winner or a loser. But he must be a participant and not a spectator.
And a generation asked to serve answered the call.
And his whole ideal of public service, of government and politics. He brought young men and women into Washington as FDR had done 20 years before.
Prominent Harvard faculty were recruited by President Kennedy as well.
And I said yes. As a historian, I would obviously be a great opportunity to see history being made at first hand. But I'm not absolutely clear what I would be doing as a special assistant. To which he replied, I'm not absolutely clear what I will be doing as president, but I'm sure there's enough to keep us both busy.
In 1963, President Kennedy visited Cambridge to select a site for his presidential library.
Jack Kennedy cared about Harvard. In every aspect of life, he wanted the best, and he knew Harvard was the best, and he could get the best possible education there and pursue his interests in history and literature and political science in particular.
After President Kennedy's death, meetings were held to discuss a presidential library. The theme of a living memorial emerged.
I think the idea of living memorial was inspired by the belief that at some time as an undergraduate at Harvard, there was an experience that the president had which furthered his interest in politics and in government and public service.
Merely establishing a library and museum in Franklin Roosevelt's tradition would not be sufficient.
There was no model for an institute of politics, a place that would try to excite people about elective politics and understand everything about elective politics.
In 1966, the Institute of Politics was established at Harvard as a living memorial to President Kennedy.
Initially, this was not very well received by most of Harvard. Most people said if we needed an Institute of Politics, we would already have one. Harvard's been successful for more than 300 years, so, what do we need something that we don't have for? Besides politics, what does that have to do on campus? It's a little dangerous.
In its first year, exciting students about politics seemed to be the least of the IOP's problems. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara discovered this when he visited Harvard to speak, shortly after Vietnam draft notices went out.
I asked the dean of Harvard College whether I should expect trouble. And the dean, with a complacency that really tells much about the old Harvard, said, "No, there'll be no trouble. Harvard men do not riot." Well, he was wrong.
Indeed, he was. A riot ensued when angry students surrounded McNamara's car.
So he got out of the car, climbed on top of the roof, and engaged in an exchange with the students. He got off somehow, I've forgotten just how, and was spirited away through the steam tunnels. And his guide was my assistant, Barney Frank.
In order to get students and politicians talking in a somewhat more civil fashion, the IOP needed a home.
When we got into the little yellow house, which was in the spring of '67, it proved to be the best strategic decision I ever made, was to grab that house and wait a year for it, because it was an ideal location for undergraduates. It was right smack in the middle of their undergraduate houses.
Quickly, students found the IOP an inspiring place to be.
In the early 70s, you couldn't help but be political. Everybody was political. You'd get tear gassed on the way to class. It was a crazy time at Harvard. The Vietnam protests were in full swing. Kent State.
With the political climate at Harvard energized more than ever, the need for a professional school of government and a large venue for public discourse was clear.
We wanted to deal with current political problems and current policy problems and shed light on them and excite people about them. We discovered we had a great big bushy tail.
But there was no dog, so it was my job to try to create the dog, or at least to create a vision of the dog and then begin building the dog.
As the IOP finished its 11th year, the Kennedy School of Government was finally completed, and the IOP moved from its little yellow house to a new home at 79 JFK Street.